Welcome to Nightshift Horror. Before we check in tonight, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know where you're tuning in from. Now get comfortable. The night shift is about to begin.
The night I realized I'd driven the same 47 miles 3 times without leaving the station, I pulled my rig into the bay and checked the odometer against my run sheet. The numbers matched perfectly. The fuel gauge hadn't moved. My coffee was still hot in the cup holder, steam rising in the dome light, even though dispatch logs showed I'd been on the road for 6 hours straight. I sat there in the cab, engine ticking as it cooled, and understood with absolute certainty that something had changed about the way time worked on these back roads, and that I was the only one who could tell. I started driving ambulance for Telfair County EMS in August of 2023, after my commercial license transferred clean from a logistics job in Valdosta. The position was advertised as rural medical transport, which meant I'd be hauling dialysis patients to Macon, moving stable post-ops between facilities, occasionally responding to motor vehicle accidents on State Route 31. Nothing dramatic. The pay was decent for the area, and the overnight differential made it worth the sleep disruption. My supervisor was a man named Gerald Potts, 28 years with the county, who handed me a laminated route map on my first shift and told me the most important skill in this job was knowing which roads flooded and which ones just looked like they did. The county was shaped like a stretched hourglass pinched in the middle by the Ocmulgee River, with our station sitting just west of the only bridge that stayed open year-round. My regular loop covered about 230 square miles, most of it pine forest and soybean fields, scattered mobile home clusters and Baptist churches with hand-painted signs. Dispatch operated out of a regional center in Dublin, 30 miles north, coordinating 8 units across 3 counties. I was Unit 14. My call sign was Telfair 14. The radio protocol was strict: acknowledge dispatch, confirm location, report arrival, report departure, return to service. Every transmission logged with a timestamp accurate to the second. The first month passed without incident. I learned the roads the way Gerald said I should, by driving them in daylight first, noting the landmarks that would matter at 3 in the morning when GPS signal dropped and every dirt turnoff looked identical. The big oak split by lightning near the Mizell farm, the abandoned Sinclair station with the rusted canopy, the concrete bridge abutment on County Road 44 that jutted out 6 inches farther than it should. I kept a paper log in addition to the electronic run sheets, old habit from trucking, tracking mileage and fuel in unusual delays. Gerald approved. He said the computer system had a way of eating records when budget reviews came around. The first repeat happened on September 19th, a Tuesday night. Dispatch called at 11:41 p.m. for a routine transfer, stable patient, non-emergency transport, from Telfair Memorial to a cardiac care unit in Macon, approximately 60 miles northeast. I acknowledged, confirmed my location at station, and rolled out at 11:47 p.m. The drive was familiar by then. North on 31, east on 44, onto the interstate for the final stretch. The patient was a man in his 70s, sedated and monitored, accompanied by a travel nurse who spent the trip reviewing charts on a tablet. We arrived at 12:53 a.m. I helped with the gurney transfer, collected the signature, and headed back. I stopped for fuel at a pilot-off exit 184 at 1:32 a.m. I was back in service at the Telfair station by 2:41 a.m. At 2:43 a.m., dispatch called with the exact same transfer, same patient name, same originating facility, same destination, same acuity code. The dispatcher's voice had the identical cadence, the same slight rasp on the word cardiac. I keyed the mic and said I'd just completed that run. There was a pause, 3 seconds I counted, and then the dispatcher acknowledged my statement and cleared the call. I noted it in my paper log. possible duplicate entry in system. I made coffee and waited for the next call. It came at 11:41 p.m. the following night, Wednesday, September 20th. Same transfer, word for word. I was parked in the same bay, Unit 14, drinking coffee from the same thermos. The dispatcher's voice was identical down to the rasp. I acknowledged, rolled out at 11:47 p.m., made the same drive. The patient looked the same. The travel nurse looked the same, reviewed charts with the same motions. We arrived at 12:53 a.m. I fueled at 1:32 a.m. I returned to station at 2:41 a.m. At 2:43 a.m., dispatch called again. I didn't acknowledge immediately. I sat in the cab with my hand on the mic, watching the dashboard clock. 2:43 became 2:44. The dispatcher repeated the call. Standard protocol was to acknowledge within 30 seconds. I keyed the mic and asked for clarification. Had this call already been assigned tonight? The dispatcher confirmed. First assignment of this type for my unit in the current shift. I checked my paper log. I had documented the run. I checked the rig's electronic log. It showed me in station since shift start at 11 p.m. No departure recorded. I rolled out at 2:48 p.m. and ran the call again. Same route, same patient, same nurse, same stops. I returned at 3:46 a.m. My paper log showed 2 completed runs. The electronic log showed 0. I brought this to Gerald the next afternoon before my shift. I showed him my handwritten notes, the fuel receipts, the mileage differential on my personal odometer. I'd started tracking it separately. He looked at the papers for a long time, then pulled up the county dispatch records on his desktop. According to the official log, Unit 14 had been in station all night September 20th. No calls assigned, no mileage recorded. But my payroll hours matched my paper log exactly, including overtime for the double run. Gerald asked if I was sleeping enough. He asked if I was taking anything for alertness. He asked if I'd been driving this route in my personal vehicle and getting confused. I told him no to all 3. He made a note in a departmental file and told me to take the next 2 nights off, paid, administrative. He said the county had been having trouble with the CAD system, computer-aided dispatch, integrating with the new payroll software. Probably a synchronization error. He'd escalate it to IT. I took the nights off. I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about the travel nurse's hands on the tablet, the way she swiped through the same screens in the same sequence both times like choreography. The way the fuel pump at exit 184 clicked off at 37.2 gallons both times. The way the patient's monitor had shown the same rhythm strip, the same oxygen saturation, the same blood pressure, not similar, identical. Both times I'd glanced at it. I came back on shift Saturday, September 23rd. Gerald said IT had pushed a patch. Everything should log correctly now. I ran 3 calls that night, all routine, all different. The system recorded everything. I started to think maybe it had been fatigue, some kind of stress echo, the brain's way of filing incomplete memories. I'd heard of that happening to long-haul drivers. Then October began and the pattern tightened. October 3rd, 11:41 p.m. Cardiac transfer to Macon. I ran it. October 4th, 11:41 p.m. Same call. I ran it. Both logged correctly this time, but the GPS timestamps were identical. Every turn, every stoplight, every second of the route matched between the 2 nights. I checked with the hospital in Macon. They had record of 1 transfer on October 4th, none on October 3rd. But I had the fuel receipt from October 3rd. I had the nurse's signature on my run sheet from October 3rd. I had the memory of doing it twice. I started recording my shifts on my phone, just audio, the mic clipped to my collar. I wanted proof of dispatch calls, time-stamped by a device outside the county system. I didn't tell Gerald. October 7th, the call came at 11:41 p.m. I recorded it. I ran it. I saved the audio file with the date. October 8th, the call came at 11:41 p.m. I recorded it. I ran it. When I got back to station, I compared the two files. The waveform was identical. Not similar, identical. Every syllable, every breath, every squelch of static lined up perfectly when I overlaid them in the audio app. I was listening to the same transmission, reproduced exactly 24 hours apart. But both nights had happened. I had lived both nights. I had fuel receipts, mileage records, signatures. The patient existed. I called Telfair Memorial directly and confirmed his admission records. The travel nurse existed. I found her name on the hospital's staff directory. The runs were real. The system just couldn't tell them apart. I tried varying my routine. On October 9th, I stopped for fuel at a different exit. I took a different route back, adding 12 miles. I wrote detailed notes about landmarks I passed. The next night, October 10th, the call came at 11:41 p.m. I ran it. My notes described the same detour, the same fuel stop, the same 12 extra miles. But the electronic log showed the original route. And when I checked my paper notes from October 9th, they described the standard route, not the detour I clearly remembered taking. I was starting to lose track of which version had happened first. Gerald pulled me into his office on October 12th. He said payroll had flagged my account. I was accruing overtime hours that didn't match any dispatch record. The CAD system showed I'd been in station or on routine calls, no extended runs. But my time card showed 6-hour blocks of continuous duty with no corresponding assignments. The county administrator wanted an explanation. Gerald asked very carefully if I was clocking in and sleeping in the rig. I told him I was running the calls exactly as dispatched. I showed him my paper log. He compared it to the CAD records on his screen. For 3 calls in the past week, my log showed duplicate entries. Same call, same night, 2 separate completion times. The CAD showed 1 entry per call, logged at the earlier time. Gerald asked if I understood how that looked. I told him I understood. He put me on mandatory leave pending a fitness for duty evaluation. Paid leave. He said it wasn't punitive. He said the county just needed to make sure I was safe to operate. I asked if anyone else had reported similar issues. He said no. I spent a week off duty. I listened to my audio recordings over and over. I had 42 dispatch transmissions saved. 17 of them were duplicates, identical waveforms, different dates. I mapped them. The duplicates clustered around 3 call types: the cardiac transfer to Macon, a dialysis run to Dublin, and an emergency pickup on County Road 18 for a fall patient named Eunice Draper. Some calls I had recorded 3 times. One I had recorded 5 times across 8 nights. I couldn't tell anymore which one had happened first, or if first still meant anything. The fitness evaluation was scheduled with an occupational health provider in Dublin. I drove up on October 23rd, my personal vehicle, midday. The clinician was professional, thorough. She asked about sleep, substance use, head injuries, family history of neurological conditions. She did cognitive tests, memory tests, reaction time assessments. Everything came back normal. She cleared me for duty and noted in her report that I appeared alert, coherent, and conscientious. Possibly overly conscientious, which could indicate work-related anxiety but not impairment. Gerald called that evening and told me I could return to shift. He said the county had hired a consultant to audit the CAD system. There'd been similar anomalies reported in other regions using the same software platform. He sounded relieved. He said it wasn't me. I came back on shift October 25th, a Wednesday. My first call came at 11:41 p.m. Cardiac transfer to Macon. I acknowledged. I rolled out at 11:47 p.m. I drove the route. I knew every turn before I made it. I knew the patient's vitals before I saw the monitor. I knew the nurse would swipe her tablet 4 times, pause, swipe twice more, then lock the screen. At the Macon facility, I checked the gurney into the cardiac unit and asked the charge nurse how many times they'd received this patient in the past month. She looked at me like I'd asked something obscene, then checked her computer. Once, she said, tonight. I showed her my run sheet from October 4th. She said their system showed no matching transfer on that date. I asked if she remembered seeing me before. She said she'd never seen me before tonight. I drove back. I fueled at exit 184 at 1:32 a.m. The pump clicked off at 37.2 gallons. I returned to station at 2:41 a.m. At 2:43 a.m., dispatch called. I sat in the cab, engine idling, hand on the mic. I didn't acknowledge. The dispatcher repeated the call. I watched the clock. 2:44, 2:45. The dispatcher's voice stayed calm, professional. Repeated the call every 60 seconds. At 2:50, Gerald's voice came over the radio asking for my status. I keyed the mic and said I was in station, unit operational, waiting for next assignment. Gerald said I had an assignment. Cardiac transfer. Departed 14 minutes ago according to GPS telemetry, currently en route to Macon. I looked at my dash. The GPS unit showed my rig in motion northbound on 31, 23 miles from station. But I was parked in the bay, engine idling, stationary. I told Gerald I was looking at my rig right now in station. There was a long pause. He said telemetry showed otherwise. He said if I was experiencing a medical emergency, I needed to declare it immediately. I told him I was fine. I told him his screen was wrong. He said he was looking at real-time GPS data, updated every 10 seconds, showing Unit 14 traveling at 54 miles per hour. I got out of the cab. I walked to Gerald's office. He was at his desk, looking at his monitor. I stood next to him and pointed at the screen. The map showed my rig near the intersection of 31 and 44. He looked at me. He looked out his window at the bay where my rig was parked, lights on, exhaust drifting in the cold air. He picked up his phone and called County IT. He stayed on hold for 6 minutes. When someone answered, he explained the situation. He was told the GPS system didn't malfunction. He was told if the map showed the vehicle in motion, the vehicle was in motion. He asked if there was any record of the system displaying a false location. He was told no. He hung up. He told me to go home. He said he'd drive me. I told him I was fine to drive myself. He said that wasn't a suggestion. I haven't been back to the station since. That was 41 days ago. I'm still receiving paychecks. My time card shows regular overnight shifts, clocked in at 11 p.m., clocked out at 7 a.m. My pay stubs show mileage reimbursement. Last week, I received an email from County HR congratulating me on 6 months of service and reminding me to complete my annual safety training. I called Gerald's desk line twice. It rings. No answer. I drove to the station last Tuesday afternoon. The bay was empty. The building was locked. There was a notice on the door about facility. Maintenance. No date. I checked my bank account this morning. Direct deposit every 2 weeks, county payroll. The memo line says EMS Unit 14. I still have my paper log. The last entry I wrote is October 25th, 2:41 a.m., return to station. The entry below it in handwriting that looks like mine but that I don't remember writing says, departed station, 2:43 a.m. Cardiac transfer, Macon. There are 68 entries after that. I didn't write any of them, but they're in my handwriting. And the mileage adds up, and the fuel receipts are in my glove box, time-stamped and sequential. I think I'm still out there, running the calls, logging the miles, returning to a station I can't find anymore. I think that's the version the system sees, the one that's still useful, still operational, still responding at 11:41 p.m. every night. And I think the version sitting here, the one that tried to stop and ask questions, is the error the system's trying to reconcile. I don't know which one is real anymore. But I know my next paycheck comes Friday, and I know I'll cash it. And I know that somewhere in the dispatch log at 11:41 p.m. tonight, a call will go out for Unit 14. And I know it will be answered. Story 2. Vitals without names. The wristband printer jammed on the 4th unidentified patient, and when I cleared the error and reprinted, the label came out blank except for a medical record number that wasn't in our system. I scanned it anyway. The computer accepted it. The patient's vitals populated on my triage screen: heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, all normal ranges, but the name field stayed empty. I looked at the woman sitting in front of me, alert and calm, and asked her to state her full name one more time. She opened her mouth and spoke, and I heard syllables, but by the time they reached my ears, they'd become something I couldn't hold on to, like trying to remember a dream the moment after waking. She finished speaking. I had no idea what she'd said, and I realized the system had stopped asking for names because it already knew we couldn't process them anymore. I started at Havenwood Regional Medical Center in October of 2012, a 200-bed facility serving 6 counties across the Appalachian foothills of western North Carolina. My title was ED Triage Nurse, which meant I was the first clinical contact for every patient entering the emergency department. My job was assessment and prioritization, collect chief complaint, measure vitals, assign acuity level 1 through 5, generate the wristband, and send the patient to the appropriate zone. During normal staffing, we ran 2 triage nurses on 12-hour shifts. During holidays, we ran 1. Thanksgiving weekend, I was alone. The ED was shaped like a horseshoe triage station at the entrance, 24 beds radiating outward, physicians, station in the center. The triage desk had 3 monitors, one for patient tracking, one for the electronic health record system called MediLink, and one for security cameras covering the parking lot and waiting room. My workstation included a vitals cart, automated blood pressure cuff, pulse oximeter, thermometer, and a label printer for wristbands. Every patient received a band with name, date of birth, medical record number, and a barcode linking to their chart. No wristband, no treatment. Policy was absolute. Thanksgiving Day was quiet, unusually so. We saw 14 patients between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. Minor lacerations, a kitchen burn, 1 cardiac chest pain who was admitted, a few pediatric fevers. Standard holiday volume. I worked alone after 3 p.m. when the day triage nurse left. Dr. Mehta was the attending, along with 1 resident and 2 floor nurses. Environmental services had reduced to a single housekeeper. Lab and radiology were skeleton crews. The hospital administrator, a man named Paul Vickers, sent an email at 4 p.m. thanking essential staff for their service and reminding us that overtime needed prior approval. The first unidentified patient arrived at 8:37 p.m. Male, approximately 45 years old, presenting ambulatory, no acute distress. He approached the triage window and waited. I greeted him and asked for his name and date of birth. He told me. I typed what I heard into the MediLink search field, and the system returned no matches. I asked him to spell it. He did. Still no match. I asked if he'd been treated at Havenwood before. He said no. I initiated a new patient registration and asked for his social security number, home address, and insurance information. He provided all of it clearly and without hesitation. None of it worked. The social security number returned an error. Invalid format. The address couldn't be verified by the system's mapping function. The insurance member ID wasn't recognized by any of the 6 payers in our database. I asked if he had his insurance card. He said he didn't carry one. I asked for a photo ID. He said he didn't have it with him. This wasn't unusual. Plenty of patients arrived without documentation, but typically I could at least create a placeholder record with basic demographic data. The system was refusing. I called Dr. Mehta over. He tried entering the information himself. Same errors. He asked the patient his chief complaint. The patient said he'd been having intermittent headaches for 3 days. No trauma, no visual changes, just wanted to be checked. Neurologically, he looked intact. Dr. Mehta made a decision. Treat as unidentified, use a temporary medical record number, bill as self-pay, and sort out registration later. He told me to assign a placeholder name. We usually use Doe John or a sequence like unknown male 1 and proceed with triage. I typed unidentified male A into the name field. The system accepted it. I printed the wristband. It came out correctly. Unidentified male A, date of birth listed as today's date, temporary MRN. I placed it on his wrist, took his vitals, blood pressure 120/78, heart rate 64, oxygen saturation 98% on room air, and assigned him to Zone 3 low acuity. He thanked me and took a seat in the waiting area. Dr. Mehta saw him 40 minutes later, ordered a basic metabolic panel and a CT head, both normal, and discharged him with ibuprofen and follow-up instructions. The man left at 10:15 p.m. Routine visit, uninsured patient, no red flags. At 10:41 p.m. a woman arrived, same presentation, ambulatory, no distress, chief complaint of mild abdominal discomfort. Same registration problem, no match in the system, invalid social security number, unverifiable address, no ID. Dr. Mehta told me to use the same placeholder process. I typed unidentified female A. The system accepted it. Wristband printed, vitals normal. Zone 3. She was seen, evaluated, and discharged by 11:30 p.m. At 11:53 p.m. another man arrived, same issue. Then a woman at 12:21 a.m. Then 2 men arriving together at 12:48 a.m. By 1:30 a.m. on Friday, November 23rd, I had processed 9 unidentified patients. All ambulatory, all low acuity complaints, all cooperative and polite. None of them could be registered in Medilink through any standard method. I had labeled them sequentially. Unidentified male A through D. Unidentified female A through E. All had been discharged. None had provided payment. I mentioned the pattern to Dr. Mehta. He said it was probably a software glitch related to the holiday system backup. IT had sent a notice earlier in the week about scheduled maintenance. He said to keep documenting and let administration handle the billing issues later. I called the IT help desk. The voicemail said that they were closed until Monday. At 2:13 a.m., unidentified male A came back. I recognized his face immediately. Same age, same build, same calm demeanor. He approached the window and said he was still having headaches. I pulled up his chart from earlier. Temporary MRN. Placeholder name. I asked if the ibuprofen hadn't helped. He looked at me without comprehension. I clarified. The medication Dr. Mehta prescribed 3 hours ago. He said he hadn't been prescribed anything. He said this was his first time at this hospital. I showed him the wristband still on his wrist. He looked down at it, then back at me, expression unchanged. I asked him to read the name on the band. He looked at it for several seconds and said he couldn't read it. I pointed at the letters. Unidentified male A. He said the letters looked blurry to him. Dr. Mehta came over. He recognized the patient. He pulled up the previous chart on his tablet and asked the patient if he remembered the CT scan. The patient said he'd never had a CT scan. Dr. Mehta showed him the imaging report. Time stamped 8:49 p.m. Normal findings. The patient stared at the screen and said he didn't understand what he was looking at. Dr. Mehta ordered another neuro exam. Everything was intact. Pupils equal and reactive, cranial nerves normal, no focal deficits. He asked me to re-register the patient as a new visit and assign a new placeholder. I typed unidentified male A2. The system accepted it. I printed a new wristband. When I tried to place it on the patient's wrist, the original band was gone. I checked the floor around him. Nothing. I checked my triage desk. Nothing. I'd placed it on his wrist 6 hours ago. It had been there 2 minutes ago when I'd pointed at it. I put the new band on, took vitals. All normal, identical readings to the first visit. I sent him to Zone 3. Dr. Mehta saw him again, repeated the workup, found nothing acute, and discharged him again at 3:05 a.m. At 3:32 a.m., unidentified female A returned, same presentation. No memory of the prior visit, wristband missing. I registered her as unidentified female A2. By 6 a.m., all 9 patients had returned at least once. 3 of them had returned twice. I had 21 charts under placeholder names. The waiting room had 4 people in it, all unidentified. None of them looked impatient. None of them spoke to each other. They sat in separate chairs, hands folded, staring at nothing. I checked the security camera feed. I scrolled back through the overnight footage. I watched unidentified male A walk out the ED exit at 10:15 p.m. At 2:13 a.m., I watched him walk back in through the same door. But between those times, from 10:16 p.m. to 2:12 a.m., the camera showed him sitting in the waiting room, continuous, never moving, for 3 hours and 56 minutes. But I'd discharged him. I'd watched him leave. I had the chart closure time, stamped at 10:15 p.m. I pulled up the other unidentified patient charts and cross-referenced the timestamps. Every single discharge showed the patient leaving, but the camera footage showed them sitting in the waiting room through their entire visit, arriving, sitting, continuing to sit during the exam I knew I'd performed, continuing to sit after the discharge I knew I'd documented, then standing and approaching the triage window again. The exams had happened. The charts were complete, the vitals were recorded, but according to the cameras, none of the patients had ever moved from the waiting room. Dr. Mehta's shift ended at 7 a.m. The oncoming attending was Dr. Lawrence, a woman I'd worked with for 2 years. I tried to brief her on the unidentified patients. I pulled up the charts to show her the documentation. The name fields were blank. Not placeholder names, blank. The temporary MRNs were gone, but the vitals were still there, updating in real time. Surdie rates, blood pressures, respiratory rates. I watched the numbers refresh every 30 seconds. Dr. Lawrence asked where the patients were. I pointed at the waiting room. She looked. She asked which ones. I pointed at the 4 people sitting there. She looked at me, then at the room, then back at me. She asked if I was feeling all right. I told her I was fine. She walked into the waiting room. She stood in the center. She looked around. She came back and said the room was empty. I looked at the camera monitor. 4 people sitting. I looked through the window at the physical waiting room. 4 people sitting. Dr. Lawrence looked at the same window. She saw no one. I asked her to check the triage tracking board. She did. It showed 0 patients waiting. I looked at my own tracking screen. It showed 4 patients. 3 with no names, 1 with a corrupted text string where the name should be. All 4 had live vitals. All 4 showed acuity level 3. Dr. Lawrence called Paul Vickers, the administrator. He arrived at 7:43 a.m. I explained the situation. I showed him the charts, the vitals, the camera feed. He looked at everything. He asked me how long I'd been on shift. I said 12 hours. He asked if I'd taken breaks. I said no. He said I needed to clock out and go home. I said I had 4 patients waiting for triage. He said the board showed 0 patients. I pointed at the monitor. He looked. He said he saw an empty waiting room on the screen. I looked at the monitor. The 4 people were still there. I could see their faces. One of them, unidentified female A, second return, was looking directly at the camera. Paul told me to clock out immediately. He said it wasn't punitive. He said he appreciated my dedication, but I was clearly exhausted. He said he'd cover triage personally until the day nurse arrived at 8. I logged out of Medilink. The system asked if I wanted to transfer my active patients. I clicked yes. It said 0. Patients transferred. I went home. I didn't sleep. I checked my work email every 20 minutes. At 11 a.m., I received an automated message from Medilink. Outstanding charts requiring closure. I logged in remotely. I had 21 open charts under my name. All from overnight. All with blank name fields. All with live vitals still updating. I clicked on one. The vitals were stable. Heart rate 61. Blood pressure 118/76. The timestamp showed last update 2 minutes ago. I checked the chart details. No encounter notes, no orders, no disposition, just vitals refreshing, patient status listed as waiting for triage. I called the ED. The unit clerk answered. I asked how many patients were in triage. She said none. I asked if anyone named unidentified male A had been seen overnight. She said she couldn't find any patient by that name. I asked her to check the camera feed for the waiting room. She put me on hold. 2 minutes later, she came back and said the waiting room was empty and had been empty since 6 a.m. I logged into the camera system from home using my staff credentials. I pulled up the live feed. 4 people sitting in the waiting room. Same 4. Motionless. I drove back to the hospital. I arrived at noon. I walked into the ED. I looked at the waiting room. 4 people sitting exactly where the camera showed them. I approached the woman who'd been looking at the camera earlier. I said her name, the placeholder name I'd assigned, unidentified female A. She didn't respond. I touched her shoulder. My hand went through cloth, through skin, through nothing. She didn't react. She kept staring forward. I stepped back. I turned. Paul Vickers was standing behind me. He asked what I was doing here. I said I needed to close my charts. He said I was on mandatory leave. I said patients were waiting. He said no one was waiting. I pointed at the woman. He looked. He said I was pointing at an empty chair. I pulled. Up the camera feed on my phone, I showed him the screen. 4 people visible. He looked at my phone. He looked at the waiting room. He said the feed was showing an empty room. I looked at my phone. 4 people. He asked me to come to his office. I followed him. He closed the door. He said the hospital was willing to provide support services. He said I wasn't in trouble. He said this had been a stressful season, and the holiday shifts were hard on everyone. He asked if I'd consider a short-term disability leave, just 2 weeks paid, to reset. I asked about the open charts. He pulled up the Medilink administrator panel. He said I had 0 open charts. He showed me the screen. Under my name, 0 encounters pending closure. I looked at my phone. I'd logged in on the drive over, 21 open charts. I showed him. He looked at my screen. He said it must be a caching error and that I should clear my app data. I asked him if anyone else had reported issues with unidentified patients. He said no. I went home. I didn't clear my app data. I've been checking it every day. The charts are still open. The vitals are still updating. As of this morning, November 30th, 1 week later, all 21 patients show stable vital signs, normal ranges, status waiting for triage. I called IT on Monday. They said there was no record of any placeholder patients created during Thanksgiving weekend. They said if the charts existed in my app, it was a local device error. They remotely wiped my app and reinstalled it. When it reloaded, the charts were still there. Yesterday, I drove past Havenwood. I didn't go inside. I sat in the parking lot and opened the camera feed on my phone. The waiting room showed 18 people now, all sitting, all motionless. None of them with wristbands I could see from the camera angle. I zoomed in on one face. I recognized her, unidentified female C. I'd triaged her at 1:04 a.m. on November 23rd. I remembered her chief complaint, sore throat. 3 days. I remembered her vitals. Blood pressure 114/70, heart rate 59. I'd sent her to Zone 3. Dr. Mehta had swabbed her for strep. Negative. He discharged her with throat lozenges and fluids. According to the chart still open on my phone, she'd never left triage. She'd been waiting for 7 days. Her vitals were still updating. Heart rate 59. Blood pressure 114/70. Exactly the same. Every reading for 7 days. I don't think they're waiting for triage anymore. I think triage was supposed to decide something about them, not which treatment zone, but something deeper, some sorting process I was performing without knowing it. And I think when I couldn't process their names, when the system couldn't recognize who they were, the sorting stopped. They became data without identity, vitals without people, and the system, efficient as always, just kept monitoring them. Kept updating their numbers, kept listing them as waiting. Because if they don't have names, they can never be called. And if they can never be called, their encounters can never close. I got an email this morning from Medilink System Administration, Automated Performance Report. It congratulated me on maintaining a 0% patient walkout rate during the Thanksgiving holiday period. It noted my average triage time of 4.2 minutes per patient, well below the departmental target. It flagged one area for improvement. 21 charts still awaiting disposition assignment. Please close at earliest convenience to maintain documentation compliance. I'm not going back to close them. Because I think if I do, if I assign them somewhere, the system will finally decide what they are. And I think they'll stop being waiting. They'll become something else, some category I don't have a name for, but they'll still be there, in that room, sitting, vitals, updating, just no longer visible to anyone who still expects patients to have names. Story 3, The Last Clearance. The motion sensor in Corridor G had triggered every night for 6 weeks, always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always in a sequence that suggested something moving from the sealed double doors at the west end toward the elevator shaft that had been welded shut in 1994. Maintenance logs showed I'd cleared the fault 22 times, each report stating, "No visual confirmation of intrusion, sensor recalibrated." On the 23rd night, I brought the building blueprints with me, the ones from the county archives, and compared them to the floor plan mounted in the service hallway. They didn't match. Corridor G existed on the old blueprints. It didn't exist on the current map. But I had the sensor alarm printout in my hand, and I was standing at the entrance to a hallway that, according to official records, had been sealed off and reclassified as mechanical space 30 years ago. I realized then that my job had never been to fix the alarms. It had been to confirm that certain parts of the building were doing exactly what they were supposed to, remaining inaccessible, even as they continued to operate. I started working maintenance at Keweenaw County Memorial Hospital in May of 2001, a 118-bed facility in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, 40 miles south of Lake Superior. The hospital opened in 1953, expanded twice, once in the 70s, once in the 80s, and had been operating under financially constrained conditions since the early 90s. My supervisor was a man named Leonard Brask, department head for environmental services and plant operations, who'd been with the hospital since 1979. He hired me after the previous maintenance tech moved downstate. My responsibilities included HVAC monitoring, routine electrical and plumbing repairs, alarm response, and after-hours emergency calls. I worked 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. weekdays with on-call rotation for nights and weekends. The hospital was shaped like a capital H, 2 patient wings connected by a central corridor housing elevators, administrative offices, and support services. The basement level contained the boiler room, laundry, food service, and storage. There was a sub-level beneath that, originally designed for morgue and pathology, later converted to record storage when the county built a standalone medical examiner facility in '87. Leonard told me during orientation that sub-level access was restricted and that I'd need his authorization for any work down there. He gave me a key ring with 43 keys labeled by door code. Sub-level keys were separate, kept in his office safe. The building had an old train building automation system installed in 1991, theoretically monitoring HVAC, fire alarms, and security sensors, but in practice it was semi-functional. Sensors failed regularly. Software glitched. We got false alarms 2 or 3 times a week. Motion detectors in empty rooms, temperature spikes in stable zones, door ajar alerts on doors that were demonstrably closed. My job was to respond, verify, document, and reset. Most of it was straightforward. The Corridor G alert started in early November 2002. I got the first call on November 4th, a Monday night at 2:17 a.m. The automated system paged me. Motion detected Corridor G, West Wing sublevel. I drove to the hospital. I lived 8 miles away in a rented duplex in Hancock and met the night security guard, a man named Carl Rosen, at the service entrance. He said he'd walked the sub-level perimeter and hadn't seen anything. I asked where Corridor G was. He checked his map. He said there was no Corridor G on the sub-level. I showed him the alert printout. He shrugged and said the system had been giving bad codes lately. I went down. Anyway, sub-level access was through a stairwell behind the kitchen. I used my general access key. The stairwell was concrete, painted institutional green, lit by wire cage fixtures. I descended 1 flight. The sub-level hallway was narrow, low-ceilinged, lined with old file room doors and storage cages. I walked the perimeter. No motion, no open doors. I checked the sensor panel near the stairwell. It listed 8 zones, A through H. Zone G showed a fault. Motion detected 2:17 a.m. Cleared at 2:21 a.m. I radioed Carl and asked if any of the old corridor designations had been renamed. He said not that he knew of. I reset the sensor and went home. I documented it in the maintenance log. False alarm, possible wiring fault in Zone G sensor. The alert repeated November 6th, 2:31 a.m. Same code, I responded. Same result. No motion, no open doors. Sensor showed fault cleared by the time I arrived. I noted it in the log and recommended replacing the Zone G sensor. Leonard approved the work order. The replacement sensor arrived November 11th. I installed it on the 13th, a Wednesday afternoon. I tested it. It functioned correctly. I closed the work order. The alert triggered again November 14th, 2:04 a.m. New sensor, same fault. I responded. I walked the entire sublevel, checked every door, every cage, every utility closet, nothing. I stood in the hallway and waited. At 2:23 a.m., the sensor cleared itself. I radioed Carl and asked if he'd seen anything on the security cameras. He said the sub-level wasn't on camera. The hospital had never run CCTV down there. I asked why. He said there was nothing down there worth monitoring. I started bringing a flashlight and a layout map. On the 15th response, November 19th, 2:41 a.m., I traced the sensor wiring. It ran along the ceiling, conduit mounted, terminating at a junction box near the west end of the hallway. Beyond the junction box was a set of double doors, painted the same green as the walls. No window, no signage. I tried my keys. None of them fit. I made a note to ask Leonard about it. He told me the doors led to an old storage area that had been permanently closed in the mid-90s due to structural concerns. Water infiltration from the adjacent hillside. The hospital had sealed it, reclassified the space as unbuildable, and removed it from active floor plans. The motion sensor, he said, was probably picking up settling or rodents in the wall cavities. He told me to keep documenting, but not to worry about accessing the sealed section. I asked if he had a key. He said he'd have to check archives. He never brought it up again. The alerts continued, twice a week, then 3 times, then 4. Always between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., always clearing themselves within 20 minutes. I documented every one. I started noticing a pattern in the timestamps. The alerts didn't occur randomly within the 2-hour window, they occurred at specific intervals. 2:17 a.m., 2:31 a.m., 2:41 a.m., 2:53 a.m., 3:07 a.m., 3:14 a.m. I charted them. The intervals were irregular but consistent. 14 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes, 14 minutes, 7 minutes. The sequence repeated. On December 3rd, I brought the pattern to Leonard. He looked at my chart. He asked why I was tracking this so closely. I said I wanted to understand the fault so I could fix it properly. He said some faults couldn't be fixed, only managed. He told me to keep responding and documenting. He said if the sensor wasn't showing any actual security risk, it wasn't a priority. I asked him why a sealed corridor still had an active motion sensor. He said the sensor had probably been installed before the sealing and nobody had bothered to disconnect it. I asked why it was still on the zone map. He said the building automation system was 20 years old and nobody had updated the software. I went back to the sub-level that night, off duty, no call. I brought a tape measure and the archived blueprints I'd requested from the county clerk's office. The current hospital map showed the sub-level as a simple rectangle, hallway, file rooms, storage. The archived blueprints dated 1953 with revision marks from 1974 showed something different. The west end of the sub-level extended an additional 60 feet beyond the current map's boundary labeled Pathology Wing. Corridor G, rooms G1, G9. I measured the hallway. From the stairwell to the sealed double doors, 112 feet. From the stairwell to the west wall on the current map, 87 feet. There were 25 feet of space that existed physically but not on paper. I tried the doors again. Locked. I examined the frame. No rust, no moisture damage. The seals were intact. If water infiltration had been an issue, I should have seen staining or deterioration. I saw nothing. I put my ear to the door. I heard ventilation, air moving, faint but distinct. Sealed spaces don't have active ventilation. I called Leonard the next morning. I told him I'd measured the corridor and found a discrepancy. He asked why I was measuring corridors. I said I was trying to understand the sensor fault. He told me very calmly that the sealed section was not part of my maintenance jurisdiction and that I should focus on active hospital areas. I asked if plant ops ever accessed the sealed section. He said no. I asked if anyone accessed it. He said there was nothing to access. I asked him if the ventilation system served the sealed section. He said he'd have to check the HVAC schematics. He never got back to me. On December 9th, the hospital had a power interruption. Brief, less than 30 seconds, long enough to trip some breakers and reset the building automation system. I was on site, responding to elevator faults. When the system rebooted, I checked the zone map on the sensor panel. For about 45 seconds before the software fully reloaded, the map displayed differently. It showed the sub-level in the old configuration, extended west wing, corridor G labeled, 9 rooms marked. Then the display refreshed. The corridor disappeared. The map reverted to the current layout. I took a photo of the panel with my phone. I had about 12 seconds of the old map visible before it switched. When I zoomed in later, I could see the room labels G1, G2, G3, and so on. G5 had a notation I could barely read. Obzimdaba Izal. I looked up what that might mean in old hospital terminology. Observation and isolation, quarantine rooms. The alerts continued through December. I responded to everyone. I documented every timestamp. I started checking other systems, HVAC logs, electrical load reports, water usage. The HVAC log showed air circulation in Zone G, not residual flow from adjacent areas dedicated. Circulation. The system was heating and ventilating a space that officially didn't exist. Electrical load reports showed continuous draw on circuit G12. I traced it on the breaker panel. It fed the sealed section. I asked Leonard what would still be drawing power in a sealed corridor. He said probably emergency lighting required by code even in closed areas. I pointed out that emergency lighting wouldn't draw continuous power, only battery trickle charge. He told me to submit a formal inquiry through the plant ops review process. I submitted it. It was denied. Reason given: request pertains to decommissioned infrastructure outside scope of routine maintenance. On December 19th, we had a major snowstorm. 2 feet in 12 hours, temperature dropping to -18 Fahrenheit. The hospital activated its emergency staffing protocol. I stayed on site for a 40-hour shift, sleeping in the maintenance office between calls. At 3:14 a.m. on December 20th, the Corridor G alert triggered. I was exhausted, irritated, and I'd had enough. I went to Leonard's office. He wasn't there. He'd gone home before the storm hit. I opened his desk. I found the sub-level key log. There were 3 keys listed for the sealed section. 2 were marked destroyed per admin directive 1996. 1 was marked retained L. Brask custody. I found it in his locked drawer. I had the master key for office furniture. I took the key and went to the sub-level. Carl saw me on my way down and asked if I needed help. I told him no. He nodded and went back to his crossword. I unlocked the double doors. They opened smoothly. No resistance. Hinges oiled. Recently. Beyond was a corridor 42 feet long, painted white, lit by overhead fluorescents that turned on automatically when the doors opened. 9 doors, 4 on the left, 5 on the right, each labeled G1 through G9. At the far end was an elevator door welded shut, metal plating bolted over, the call button. The air was warm, ventilated. I could hear the HVAC register running. I walked to the first door, G1, no window. I tried the handle, locked. I knocked, no response. I moved to G2, locked. G3, locked. At G5, the door was ajar, half an inch. I pushed it open. The room was 15 by 12 feet, white walls, linoleum floor, a hospital bed in the center. The bed had restraints, leather cuffs 4-point attached to the frame. They looked old but maintained. On the wall was a mounted camera, lens pointed at the bed. A red LED glowed beneath it. Active. There was a chart holder on the wall by the door. I pulled the chart. Patient name, redacted, black marker over the field. Date of admission, April 7th, 1991. Date of discharge, blank. Diagnosis, under observation. Attending physician, name redacted. The last progress note was dated December 19th, 2002. Yesterday. Handwritten. Patient stable, vitals monitored remotely. Continue current protocol. I checked the bed. The sheets were creased as if recently occupied. I touched them, still warm. I went to G6, door ajar. Same setup. Bed restraints, camera chart, different patient name, also redacted. Admission date, June 1993. Last progress note, December 19th. Same handwriting. G7 same, G8 same. All 4 charts had progress notes dated within the last 24 hours. I went back into the corridor. I looked at the elevator. I approached it. I put my hand on the welded plating. It was vibrating. Faint but present. Something mechanical running behind it. I turned. Leonard was standing at the double doors. He said I shouldn't be down here. I asked him what this was. He said it was decommissioned space. I showed him the chart from G5. I asked him how decommissioned space had patient charts updated yesterday. He told me to put the chart back. I asked him who was writing the progress notes. He said he didn't know. I Asked him if patients were being kept down here. He said no. I asked him if patients had been kept down here. He didn't answer. I asked him what continue current protocol meant. He told me to leave the corridor and return the key to his office. I asked him if he'd been coming down here. He said his job required periodic inspections of all hospital infrastructure, including sealed sections. I asked him if the inspections involved updating patient charts. He said the charts were historical records maintained for legal compliance. I pointed out that historical records don't get updated with today's date. He told me I was misunderstanding the documentation process. I walked past him out of the corridor. I went upstairs. I sat in my truck in the parking lot with the engine running, heat on, and tried to decide what I'd just seen. I called the state health department the next day. I explained that I'd found patient records in a sealed hospital corridor. They asked for the patient names. I said they were redacted. They asked for the attending physician. I said redacted. They asked for the medical record numbers. I read them off. They said they'd look into it. They called back 3 days later. No matching medical record numbers in any state database. No evidence of active or archived patients corresponding to my report. They asked if I was certain the records were real. I said I'd held them. They said they'd note my concern but couldn't investigate further without verifiable patient identifiers. I tried to access the corridor again on December 27th. The key didn't work. The lock had been changed. I asked Leonard for the new key. He said there was no new key. He said the corridor had been resecured per administrative directive and was no longer accessible to plant ops staff. I asked who had access now. He said he wasn't authorized to disclose that. I submitted a formal safety concern through the hospital's internal reporting system. I cited the active HVAC, the electrical draw, the updated patient charts. The response came back from risk management. Maintenance staff are not authorized to access or report on sealed infrastructure. Concern dismissed. I kept responding to the Corridor G motion alerts. They continued, same pattern, same intervals. But now when I went to the sub-level, the double doors were gone. Not locked, gone. The wall was smooth, painted green, continuous from the stairwell to the utility closet at the west end. No seam, no frame, no evidence there'd ever been doors. But the sensor still triggered, and the HVAC still ran, and circuit G12 still drew power. I requested the building blueprints again from the county. They sent me the current set. No Corridor G. I asked for the archived 1953 originals. They said those records had been destroyed in a records retention purge in 1997. I checked my phone. I still had the photo of the sensor. Panel from December 9th, showing the old map. I opened it. The image was corrupted. Just gray pixels. I worked at Keweenaw County Memorial until March of 2003. I responded to Corridor G alerts 63 more times. I documented everyone. On March 14th, Leonard called me into his office and told me the hospital was restructuring plant ops. My position was being eliminated. They offered me a severance package contingent on signing a non-disclosure agreement regarding all hospital infrastructure and maintenance records. I read it. It specifically prohibited discussion of sealed or decommissioned facilities, patient records encountered during maintenance duties, and building configurations not reflected in current documentation. I signed it. I took the severance. I drive past the hospital sometimes. It's still operating under new management, renamed. I checked their website. The sub-level isn't listed on the facility map, but if you look at the building from the west side, you can count the windows. There are 2 fewer on the ground floor than there should be given the length of the structure. The space is there. You just can't see where it starts. I still have my maintenance logs, the ones I kept personally separate from hospital records. The last Corridor G alert I documented was March 13, 2003 at 3:14 a.m. Motion detected, cleared at 3:21 a.m. I just checked the online portal for Keweenaw County Memorial's building automation system. I still have my old login. They never deactivated it. The sensor map still shows 8 zones, A through H. Zone G triggered 40 minutes ago, 2:53 a.m. It's still clearing itself, still running the sequence, still monitoring a corridor that doesn't exist in a space that was never built for patients who were never admitted. But someone is still writing those progress notes. Someone is still running that protocol, and the hospital is still paying for power, heat, and ventilation to rooms that no map will acknowledge. I think about those beds sometimes, the restraints, the cameras with the red LEDs. I think about what continue current protocol means when the protocol has been running for 30 years and nobody will say what it's for. I think my job was never to fix the alarms. It was to prove the space could be contained, could be monitored, could continue operating without acknowledgement. And I think I did my job perfectly, because I documented everything, reported it through proper channels, and when those channels closed, I accepted that some infrastructure isn't meant to be accessed. Some corridors are built to remain sealed, not because there's nothing inside, but because what's inside needs to stay exactly where it is, doing exactly what it's been doing, watched by systems that will never stop running. Even if no one's supposed to know they're there,